This is Jay Michaels, and this is early in the morning. So unfortunately, I can't greet our guest with a glass of wine as I wanted to. I do have Cabernet wine biscuits that maybe I'll munch on during this, so at least I feel connected in this way. We're really honored. We have Maureen Petrosky, who is here to talk about wine. You're the lifestyle. You're on the Today Show.
Yeah,
what is your title?
I do entertaining and lifestyle segments for the Today Show and all sorts of other outlets. As far as television goes, we like to educate in a fun and entertaining way. So while I am a certified sommelier, which is a little bit stuffy for some.
That's great. It's intimidating to me. That's pretty cool.
Everything I do has to be approachable and fun, because if it's not, then why do it?
Wow, that's great. Oh, that's great. You're going to host Ripple Effect Artists wine event near Valentine's Day, and that's the main reason we're speaking to you. That's the main reason on that level. Me personally, I have always wanted to understand wine. I've always wanted to get into it so much more. So I'm thrilled that I got this opportunity. Tell us about you. Tell us about how you got into this in the first place.
Well, it was kind of by default. I think that's if you follow your heart, just like most creative people do, you find yourself in all sorts of jobs that you never actually anticipated. So for me, I studied undergraduate at Villanova University. And then I always was drawn to the culinary arts. I always wanted to cook. I love it. I didn't grow up in a household that cooked or knew about food. So for me to go and study it was something that was really, really intriguing. And so right after Villanova, I went to culinary school, and a lot of people would kind of turn their nose up at that because Villanova is a prestigious business school and nursing school, and they would have thought, why are you going to school to learn to cook now? But I had always big ideas for what I wanted to do. And when I went to learn about culinary school, I saw it as such a wide open landscape. And now this was I don't want to date myself, but this was a while back. This was before everyone was a food blogger and everyone had a camera phone and everyone knows about food or is a foodie. This was kind of in the beginning days of the Food Network. So food being a production and really widely accepted and huge audience was not really a thing yet, but it was still a really amazing creative outlet. When you think about appealing to the senses as an artist, you think about maybe one or two senses, but with food, you really appeal to all of the senses. You look at it, you smell it, you taste it, you hear it when you're cooking, you can feel it in your mouth. So it was just this ultimate challenge for me. And when I went to culinary school, I really buckled down. I studied harder there than I ever did at Villanova University because I loved it and I was challenged by it. Now, when I then stayed at the CIA and did a fellowship, which is kind of like an assistant instructor, and I did my fellowship in the American Bounty. So the way that culinary school is set up is there's 4 restaurants that you have to work in as a student, both in the front of the house and in the back of the house. So I worked as an assistant instructor in the front of the house. And then I really learned a lot more about service and I guess you would say the theater of food, right? When you're out there and you're presenting and you're selling and you're serving people and there's tableside and you're opening a bottle of wine and pouring wine. And just the whole show about it, how it made it even more special. And I really got into wine then. And being in that position allowed me to sit with the person that was purchasing the wines for the restaurants. Even though this is an education space, it was really something that I learned even more on and that I could put into play in the real world. And so I was learning to taste and smell. And really that's the whole idea of drinks and wine. And what I can tell you, Jay, is that the most important thing is to find what you like. I can teach you a million things, but it's most important for me that the person that's drinking the wine is loving the experience. And that's going to be different for every single one of us. Again, just another layer of challenge. So I really loved all of these things that I was finding. And then I went to Atlanta, I got married and I worked in a restaurant, but I found out very quickly that working on the line in a restaurant is very difficult to pay the bills. So I started working in the front of the house again. I had all the skills. I waited a lot of tables in college. And so I started waiting tables again. And then I asked, to be involved in more management and purchasing wine. And then I went back and did my sommelier certification through the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is basically just getting another degree and studying. And the only way that you can really do it is by practice. And for me, that was the most fun part. So I love studying for that exam. And then once I got that piece of paper, it kind of opened some more doors for me. But again, more importantly, it was about having that experience with my friends, with my family. I wanted to drink wine. You know, I think people progress naturally from drinking beer to maybe trying a cocktail to dabbling in wine, and it might be white or red. But when you can do it in the comfort of your home with your friends and open a couple of different bottles and taste, it becomes a whole different dynamic, and you learn to love what you love in the comfort of your own space. And so for me, that was the impetus for my first book, which was called The Wine Club. And that's how I met Bob, who is involved with Ripple Effects. And that's how we've stayed friends for many years, because he also was very interested in wine and a wine lover. And so that's how the wine part of this career started for me.
You say sommelier, and I think that's an amazing term, and it's such an intimidating term to begin with. You said something very interesting, and I always hear this on cooking shows all the time. They say you eat with your eyes. Because obviously, as you say, you know, food is an entire experience, and wine is an experience also. I hear people talk about the oaky texture, and then there's a fruitiness, but then you taste leaves and everything. How difficult is that to, I won't say master, that's a terrible way to put it, but how did you train yourself so that you could smell, you could taste the wine? You know, oh, okay, I can tell from this grape, from this. How do you? I'm losing my words here.
I know, it's a lot.
How do you figure it out?
It is a lot of time, and it is a commitment. I'm not going to lie to you. To find out all those nuances that you mentioned, things like oaky and the terroir, and does it taste like leaves or smell like, you know, kumquats? Who knows? But the way that you do it is by exposing yourself to all those different things over and over and over again. And so I felt like with wine, I actually think spirits are so much easier to learn, which people don't realize. Like when you talk about whiskeys and scotches, and they think that's all nuanced, but actually wine is, for me, the most difficult, because there are so many wineries in so many parts of the world with so many different landscapes. And when I say the word terroir, which is another kind of intimidating term, but it's basically French just for like the landscape, the rainfall, it's agriculture. So when you think about it that way, right, a grape is simply agriculture. It's just a fruit. It's how it's then manipulated and changed. And so there's a lot of things that play into it. And I have to say that from the jump at the Culinary Institute of America, I got such a great foundation in wine. The way that school is set up is that it's a progressive learning year. So you only study one thing at a time. So often people will ask chefs, what's your specialty? At the Culinary Institute of America, what they teach you is that you have to specialize in everything. You've got to know everything, because you can't just know one thing. You can go on and focus on one thing, but before you graduate from there, you've got to specialize in everything. So you take one class at a time. And the way that the wine course was set up was, I think it was 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and that's all you did. It's one of the only places in the United States where it's legal for someone under 21 to drink wine, because it's an educational environment. And in that space, you're tasting 6 to 10 different wines a day. So as a student, it's immersive. It's a completely immersive class that you build on. And the way that it's set up is very simple. They start with this type of grape, and then you go on to learn more about how, you know, the different regions, and then the different winemakers. So all of the levels of things play into those final things that you got to talk about a little bit there with the oakiness or the fruits or aromas. But one thing I do want to say is, for someone that's a beginner, when you talked about eating with your eyes, you drink with your eyes too. So your eyes can tell you a lot before you ever get near that glass of wine. Immediately you can see if it's red or if it's white, if it's bubbly, if it's still. You can swirl it and see how thick it is, the viscosity of it. We talk about the
tear.
legs.
People talk about the tear on a glass. Am I wrong?
Yeah, so, or the legs. They're
Okay.
sometimes called legs. So, and that's the wine that when you swirl it, it sticks to the outside of the glass, and then how slowly are those tears or legs coming down into the glass again. And how slowly is indicating how thick it is, and how thick it is the viscosity, and the viscosity is from alcohol and sugar content. So right away, before you ever get near that, you're learning how to do that. And so when we evaluate wines professionally, there's levels of things you go through. It's not just all at once. You have to pick it apart. It's almost like a big diagram. You're looking at it, you're smelling it, you're tasting it, you're feeling it in your mouth, you're paying attention to the finish of it afterwards. Then you start playing with it and food, and how it plays with other flavors, and does it work well? Does it not work well? There is technique to it. So it's not something you're going to jump into tomorrow, or come and pay attention to one class and think you're a wine expert. Now, many people might, but the whole idea is that you never really master it. It's a constant learning. You have to always be learning and tasting, because things change dramatically. When I talk about it being agriculture, you think about the weather. We've seen weather change dramatically around the globe. So that's dramatically impacting what's in your glass. In all honesty, you think about years where there's been terrible droughts or fires. The California fires this year is going to dramatically impact the wine industry and what flavors it is. Now, believe it or not, there's going to be a lot of smoky flavors and aromas that are going to be in those wines just because of that environmental impact. And so you don't think about it in a couple of years when you're at the wine store and you're picking up a bottle of wine that's now been aging, or you don't think back to, oh, remember 2020 when there was those terrible fires, and then put it together with what's in the wine. And I have a friend who's a winemaker actually at a winery called Hoops. And what they did was they started taking those grapes and turning it into brandy, because it already had all of those smoky effects that they weren't going to be able to make a clean Cabernet like they typically would have. They had to pivot and get very creative and start thinking, how do we not lose this entire crop? Because in the beginning and in the end, it is farming, it is agriculture. So there's so many things that if you kind of start to think back to just, is it a sunny day? Is it a rainy day? What's the seasons like? You can learn a lot about what the vintage is going to be like. So again, there's so many parts to it, but you can really simplify it to a place where you feel comfortable picking up a bottle and purchasing something you're going to like.
You really blew my mind, because of course, I hear people, they had a drought that year, or
Right.
the terrible rains that year, whatever. So of course, something that came out of this year would have the smoky aroma. Right. You can actually chart the history of the globe with the history of wine, which is fascinating.
Right, it's like the farmer's almanac for wine drinkers, because if you're paying attention to the weather, then that's going to affect it.
Now, wine is always looked at and this word is used derogatorily, but I don't mean it this way, in an elite way.
Definitely.
I remember at one point I was taking my mother to dinner, and we went to a restaurant and they poured a bit of the wine. I took it and said, "Oh, that's fine." And she thought how classy it was that I tasted the wine. In learning, it sounds funny to put this. Can you suspend that when you ask questions? Can you ask dumb questions when learning about wine? Can you ask dumb questions? Can you? Is this woody? Is this oaky? What is it? Can you be dumb?
Absolutely can, and that's the only way to learn, is that you can't be afraid to ask questions. It's like anything new, and like I said, it's constantly changing. So even for those of us who are experts or masters or sommeliers, you've got to be open-minded and learning. No one knows everything about wine. No one, not even a winemaker. They're going to learn from each other. So you have to ask questions of each other. You have to ask questions of yourself. Do I actually like this? I mean, am I into oaky wines? I don't know. Or just because it's expensive, is it something delicious? I mean, I don't know. You don't have, there is always an air of exclusivity around wine, but I do believe that, again, going back to it, most winemakers I know are the salt of the earth. They're out there with their fingers in the dirt. They're out there with the farmers. They take it from the earth to the bottle all the way. And they're just birthing each year, each vintage. And they get their hands dirty. They are not, elitist about it. I think that something that I always think about is, a long, long time ago, as I kind of straddle the atmosphere here where I do presentations, but I also work as a journalist, and I had the opportunity to interview Julia Child, and I was asking her about wine. And I said to her, well, what do you think of, wine snobs? And she just thought there's no place for that. But one of the things she said to me that sticks with me all the time, and it resonates into really diffusing that idea of wine being elitist, was that a restaurant is only as good as its least expensive bottle of wine. So she was saying that the best restaurant in the world, the most expensive restaurant in the world, needs to be able to stand behind that least expensive bottle, needs to be just as delicious. And so it was empowering to me as someone that was always like, oh, which bottle do you, order? Do you order the most expensive? Do you order the least expensive? Do you just, go in the middle there? Or, how does price indicate that? But that also is that air of elitism, when people just want something because they think it's expensive, so then it's better. But that's just not the case. And so you can take it from Julia Child. She gives you permission to order the least expensive bottle, and it should be delicious if the place is a good restaurant.
Now there's the big question for all of us on a budget. To buy an inexpensive bottle of wine, we will still find quality there. It's not, they talk about cheap wine. They talk about
Right.
things like that. One can still judge quality, even if you're going for an inexpensive, just table wine to have with dinner, you and a friend or whatever.
Definitely. I drink wine daily, so I don't want to spend my entire paycheck on wine. I want something that's delicious, that's worthy of the occasion I'm having. Certainly, there's sometimes where I'll want something that's a little more special. So the two big things that indicate the price of a bottle are its availability. So if it's not available, it's going to be more expensive, right? And then it's perception. If someone thinks that it's expensive, like a bottle of Dom Perignon, and it's worth the money, they're going to pay for that. But you can get a delicious bottle of champagne, or even a Cremant d'Alsace or Bourgogne, which is made the exact same way as champagne, but one town over, so they can't use that label. But side by side, if you don't drink those every day, you wouldn't know the difference.
I'm so glad you said that. Someone once gave me a glass of Dom Perignon and said, wow, this is Dom Perignon. I didn't like it. And I felt terrible. I thought, oh, I'm a horrible human being. I don't like Dom Perignon. So I'm so happy to hear you say that. Now you were a trendsetter. You started before this all became the great big trend. How have you seen the industry change since then? How has it grown?
I think dramatically, you see a lot more women involved in the industry. You see that it has changed its profile of being one specific white male, 55 years and older. That's not the case anymore. We're seeing people of every walk of life, every socioeconomic category, every race, every religion being into wine now. Because what's happened is, I talked about going to culinary school before food was so big, but it's just organic that you go from loving food to loving wine. It's just a natural progression. It's the next step. So every culture around the world usually has some kind of drink or cocktail or wine that goes with their food. And as travel became more accessible, and as food became more accessible all over the place, that you could have all these different flavors, the industry has changed dramatically. So it's not completely all one way or the other, but I'm seeing a lot more opinions and voices and faces in it, which is changing the final products. So also, there's a lot more permissions given, where if you like sweet wine, drink sweet wine. I mean, a lot of that elitism that we hit on before is filtering away. We just don't have time for that anymore. I mean, everybody wants to treat themselves and feel like they're indulging a little bit, but it doesn't have to be at the cost of your entire paycheck, and it doesn't have to be at the cost of feeling belittled. You can have whatever wine you want.
So to have a glass of sweet wine because I like it is not to be frowned upon. This is simply my taste. So
absolutely not. And again, there's a difference between a glass of sugary sweet something or a glass of a dessert wine that a winemaker crafted in a way that is delicious, that is respectable, because anything you're sipping should be balanced. Even a very sweet wine shouldn't just be a sugar bomb.
right.
It should have some finesse to it. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It should have a little acidity that makes your mouth water. It shouldn't just be sugar. So even in that category, you have to evaluate it for what it is. It's going to be sweet. It's going to be sweeter than something dry, which for me, when I was learning about wine, the very first thing was I couldn't understand dry.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh,
why you would use the term dry to describe something that's wet? I just couldn't get my head around it. But
oh, thank you.
The thing is, it's just about sugar content. Dry means it's not sweet. So you have to there's certain things you just have to accept about it and learn. And then once you understand it, it makes it so much easier. But again, even a wine that is sweet should be balanced. It should be interesting. It should have something that makes you want to have another sip.
Oh, I'm so happy. I don't know how many times someone said, "This is would you like a dry wine?" And I'm like, that's fine. And I'm like, huh? Okay. Oh, the sugar content. Okay. Got it.
You got it. See, little by little, you'll learn. And again, it's all these building blocks. You're not going to do it in one day. It takes practice. It's fun to do it with friends. It's more fun than reading a textbook. You've got to be tasting. There's no way to learn about it without tasting it.
Now there's a big thing. Now we're chatting because also you are going to be hosting Ripple Effect Artists fundraiser around Valentine's Day, which is a wine party. And I've often said this. I follow just about every cooking show, and I always say, okay, it looks great, but I'm not there to taste it. What's your challenge for this event?
So it's always challenging, but what we're going to do is let our guests know some guidelines and some suggested wines so that they can taste along with us. It's not, hopefully it won't just be me talking to the screen, but even if it is, you're going to be able to learn a lot and pick up a lot of what I like to call party favors. These are little tips and tricks that you can use at any time, whether you have a glass in front of you or not. But hopefully what we're aiming to do with the fundraiser is that we will be providing the guest with an outline kind of what we'll be talking about so that they can have wines there as well to taste along with me. And even if they don't have the same wines, if they have any wine at their disposal, I welcome them to pour a glass and have an open conversation and I can answer questions to the best of my ability about what they have in front of them and what I have in front of me. And hopefully we'll learn a little bit along the way and have a good time.
Wow, that's fabulous. So you're going to give us sort of an outline beforehand. So if I wanted to, I can go to my local liquor store or my local wine shop and pick up. So I could be sitting here with these samples, and as you talk about the dry wine, I can then learn from you. Oh, that's great.
And that's exactly how we're doing it in the industry right now. We're tasting together virtually. We used to have huge conferences where we would taste wine every year and the vintages. We're just not doing that now. We're all kind of on our own, but luckily we are able to gather in some way, virtually, to be able to share our experiences. So I really do encourage the guests to ask questions, to bring anything they want to the table. This is supposed to be fun, enjoyable fundraiser for a good cause, to support the arts, all while having something delicious to sip.
Have the questions changed since you went virtual? You've now had almost a year of elucidating us online. Have the questions changed because of it?
Do you mean the questions about wine or what we're...
Exactly. As you interface with people online, whether it's at the Today Show, whether it's wherever, do people ask different questions now that you have the divide of the screen, or is it the same basic
question? The only thing that I find is that often we're getting less questions because people are also then put on a platform. So hopefully we'll be set up in a space where if you're not comfortable asking a question, you can type it into a chat, and maybe we can have that open dialogue there. It's hard for people to get into a zone and feel comfortable. So hopefully our wine will help that a little bit along the way. People have a few sips and they'll feel a little bit more comfortable asking. Also, I'm expecting, because this crowd is into the arts and performers, that we won't have too many shy people at our party. If anything, we might have too many questions and too much conversation, but for me, that's what makes it more fun. And I am glad that we're a little bit into this now. We're almost a year into interfacing like this, that people are more comfortable with the medium and finding that it's not so strange to just stare at a screen. Now, for us in TV world, we're used to staring at a screen. We often just see a blinking green light, and that's what we're talking to. So even though we're broadcast into millions of homes, we're used to just looking at that. And now we get to see your faces, which is really fun.
That's so fascinating. I never gave that any thought. I've always been a live theater person, and very recently, actually before this, I was part of a television program. And yes, you're right. The little red light on the camera is my only friend, and so I had to hope that little red light smiled.
Yes.
And it was such an experience to me. But if anything, this is more because
more
the TV is talking back.
Yes.
Oh,
so that's fun for us, and to get to see people. And I really do hope that the event kicks off and gets us through a little bit of that winter dreariness in February. We're going to be right around Valentine's Day, so we will be talking a little bit about chocolate too, and how wine plays with sweets. So it'll be timely and hopefully just a good time.
How about pairings? I'm a big fan of having wine with dinner. I'm not one to have a glass of wine just separately, but I love a wine, a dessert wine, etc. with dinner. What does one look for? What's like, it's a long answer, I'm sure, but what's one or two tiny things that someone should look for when they're pairing a wine with dinner or with food?
So the three rules of thumb when pairing wine with food is that you can complement your meal. So for example, if you're having that big juicy red steak, you have a big juicy red wine. You're complementing it. You can contrast your food. If you're having a creamy soup or something that's heavy with a cream sauce, you can have a glass of champagne that's going to cut through that mouthfeel. So it's the contrast there. And then the third way that we learn about, these are again just the very skeleton basics, is to bridge the wine. So for instance, if you're having duck with a red wine sauce, you then drink the same red wine with that. So those are the very basic starts to pairing. It's either complementing, contrasting, or bridging. So you're using the same wine that's in the recipe. Now from there, you can go in a lot of different directions. And again, people have all sorts of different palates. So while there are guidelines, they are not hard and fast rules. You can kind of tweak it to work for you and your palate. So let me ask you, since you said you do drink wine with your dinner, do you typically go for the same wine and see where the meal takes you, or do you let the meal indicate what wine you're having?
I usually let the meal indicate, and I'm often quite ignorant. My wife will say, no, you can't have that with this meal. You shouldn't have that with this meal, because we were quite lucky. We got gifts of several bottles of wine over the holidays. So we thought, well, this is great. Let's have a good time with dinner. But I usually look at the meal and then decide in terms of what I'm going to have.
And that's typically the case. So I don't know your heritage or why you're drawn to having wine with dinner, because typically people that do that are either raised that way, or that's in their heritage, or they like to travel and they've learned that having the wine from that region with that style of food is very enjoyable. So I don't know, can you tell me a little bit about your backgrounds, like your heritage and eating? Like, is this new, or have you explored this as an adult, or were you raised this way?
I was certainly not raised this way. My family is not drinkers by any stretch of the imagination. We don't do that. Mine is rather funny. I had a very thick Bronx accent as a kid, and so I would watch a lot of British television to cure that accent.
Okay.
And in watching British television, I saw the stereotypical Anglican way, if you will, and I saw people drinking wine a great deal, and I thought, okay, let me try that. So in curing my regional tone, there were several habits I picked up along the way, one of them being wine. And my uncle also, I have an uncle who's very much into wine. And whenever I was at his house, he would always, he was one of, this is very dry, try this. And I'd be like, oh, it's dry. And I had no idea what he meant. But basically for me, it's just something that looked alluring amongst others. It's not within my family or anything like that.
And I have the same kind of story. I was not raised with wine. By any means. My mom boiled everything. That was the way she cooked, was boiling. There was a pot of water, and anything that could get boiled got boiled. We were not connoisseurs. We did travel, but we didn't, food wasn't the focus. Now when I travel, food is the focus. I want to go know where we're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I want to know what we're going to drink. So it's changed a little bit. But the traditional American family isn't raised with wine at the dinner table. That's just not the case. And so usually it's someone, my husband is Sicilian, and he was raised with wine in the household. They had wine, there was wine on the table. That was just the table wine. So that was totally normal for him. That was not a normal thing for me. It is now normal for our children to see wine at the dinner table. And again, we normalize it, and then it doesn't become so dramatic when they turn, of drinking age or prior to that, and indulge themselves. But it's not the American culture or the American way to drink wine with food. In fact, mostly people drink it solo. Like you said, you're not typically going to pour a glass of wine or have a drink by itself, but you prefer it with food. Everywhere else in the world, that's the case, but here. So I do think that that has also changed a little bit in our landscape, where wine fits into our lifestyles.
Do you think, because we're such a commercial country, do you think the reason that people grab wine is almost the same reason I did it? Oh, look what it looks like to have wine. Do you get the fashion statement out of wine a great deal?
Well, I'm sure that there certainly is. But I think that more for us, it's the fun part of it. Is that, I mean, we even see so many fun labels now, and people buy books by the cover. We buy wine by the labels, and you'll see that some of those really fun, maybe less finesse bottles are very, very popular in the United States. You know, things that really drive sales are, again, the cost and where does it fit in? Is it easy to drink? And I think people still in this country love quantity. So a lot of wine gets drank, especially now.
At the event, you're pairing with chocolate. You're going to talk about food. You're going to talk about all of this in terms of wine. What would you give if you could give one bit of instruction to everyone? That one thing to say about wine and choosing wine. What might it be? Could there be that one thing that we should all keep in the back of our heads as we're choosing wine?
I mean, I just feel like if there's one thing, it's that you can't go wrong. If you're going to taste something, be open-minded to whatever you're opening. It may not be exactly what you thought it was going to be. A lot of times the description on the bottle is dead on, and it might help you find what you want. And sometimes it's not. It's a little bit, you know, more cryptic, I would say.
Yeah.
So you might not find exactly what you want in that bottle, but whatever it is you're tasting, always look at it as a learning experience. You know, it might be a grape that you think you love, Cabernet Sauvignon, and you picked it from somewhere, a region that you didn't know, and then you find out you love it, but you could also find out you hate it. So, but then you just remember that I don't want wine from that region, or I don't love a Cabernet Sauvignon, I like a Merlot. And the best way to do it is to taste them side by side. You know, try different things. There's so much wine out there.
What's next for you? What's next for you? You're at the top of your game, which is absolutely wonderful. What are your plans for the future? What are you looking to do in this year?
Funnily enough, I just came out with my third book, which is called Zeroproof Drinks and More. And so the trends that we were seeing prior to the pandemic were that people were choosing to have less alcohol. And we were seeing bars pop up that had zero-proof menus, that had alcohol-free drinks. A lot of bartenders and mixologists were really working to make delicious craft cocktails that didn't have alcohol in them. And so I really started to explore that. And the new book just came out this January. So it's great for dry January, but I do think that at some point, all of this indulgence in, you know, letting ourselves think it's a pandemic, I can have this, I can drink this, I can drink at 11 in the morning. And I mean, I appreciate that you said you couldn't, but you by all means can. It doesn't, the rules have kind of gone out the window, people working from home. But I do think that people are choosing to have non-alcoholic drinks more often. And so they need to be something that's crafted and interesting and worth taking the time to make. So the book includes recipes that are far beyond just a vodka soda, and they have very interesting flavors. And I talk about the building blocks of a zero-proof bar and how those drinks can be incorporated. So whether you want to give up alcohol completely, or you just want to give it up for the night, or maybe you're training for a race or something, or you're preparing for a part, there's all sorts of ways that you can incorporate the zero-proof drinks into your lifestyle as well. And they can be just as delicious and just as fun.
I think that's phenomenal. Oh my gosh, I think that's phenomenal. You were a trendsetter way back when, and you're a trendsetter now.
Well, thanks. I never really see myself that way. You know, I think we kind of go into our own holes, and I like to explore what intrigues me and what challenges me. And I have to tell you, after talking about and writing about wine and spirits for a very long time, taking the challenge of making a drink without alcohol that was going to be worthwhile was a challenge. I was thinking, there's no way that I'm going to want to make something like this, but I've learned a lot along the way. And for me, it's the learning is just as much fun as the failing. You know, I learn so much, and then I take that with me to the next, you know, project that I do.
They should all be like you. Whenever I've spoken to any wine authority, I've always gotten the feeling it's like, oh, I'm sorry, no. I didn't realize it was, I didn't know where it was from the Napa Valley, please. I always was intimidated, and I mean this is the highest compliment. I'm not intimidated now. I feel like I've learned something from you. I've spoken to an authority who cared. Oh, they should all be like you.
Well, I aim to make everybody comfortable. I mean, I'm an entertainer at heart. That is my love language, is to have people in my home and cook for them and pour them drinks. And whether you want a glass of fancy Cabernet Sauvignon, or you want a table wine, or you want a zero-proof drink, my goal is to make you feel comfortable here with me and teach you a little along the way. If you think about it, not everyone's going to be a sommelier, and after our tasting together, not everyone's going to be a wine expert, but hopefully they learn a little something that empowers them then to make that next decision on their own. There's only a very, very few people in this world that are master sommeliers or masters of wine, and they dedicate their entire lives to it. So for me, most people just want to have it as something enjoyable, as a part of their lifestyle, and I would never judge someone or expect them to know everything that someone who spends every waking hour on it does know. So for those people who pretend like they know all, or they've traveled everywhere, or they've been the best sellers, or they have their own wine cellar, they don't sound that much fun. I'd rather not have them at the party.
Well, I am sure Ripple Effects event is going to be that much fun because of you. When is the event? Can you tell us when the event is?
I think the event is on the 12th.
On the 12th.
I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the calendar. It's
That's okay.
Time of year. Again, with the new book coming out, every single day is some kind of event that we're promoting and working on spreading the word about those drinks as well and that book. So I think the event is the 12th because we were aiming to be really close to Valentine's Day.
Great. Okay, so I will make sure there are links to that. And how do we get your book?
So Zeroproof.
Now this is the third book. So how do we get all three of your books?
This is the third book. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little like glazed over, but Zeroproof is available everywhere books are sold. So you can either go to IndieBound and find your local independent bookstore. You can go to Amazon, Amazon Prime, and Barnes & Noble carries the book as well. It's distributed here and in Canada already, and we're hoping for some more international distribution as well, just like we did with the Wine Club and the Cocktail Club. These are the other books. So the idea is, again, to get together with your friends, enjoy some drinks, learn a little something along the way, and then next time you're out, you can buy whatever you like, because then you know a little bit.
That is terrific. That is terrific. Maureen, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm going to run over to my little wine shelf right now and look at it and say, I bet you. Let me see what I'm really excited about the info you've given me, and I am sure that everyone's going to walk away from the Ripple Effect Artist event absolutely enthralled.
Well, I hope so. I mean, we're looking to have a great time and raise a little bit of money for a good cause. So I'm happy to be part of it.
And you're going to be a wonderful part of it. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you.
All the best to you.
Cheers.
Ciao.